Story 1. The Melody of Trust. The late afternoon sun filtered through the tall maple trees, casting long shadows across the Virginia countryside. Olivia Morgan, a 42-year-old former concert pianist, stood at the entrance of the county animal rehabilitation center, her fingers twitching nervously at her sides, a habit she developed since the accident 3 years ago that had left her right hand with limited mobility and ended her performance career. "Ms. Morgan, they're ready for you," said a young woman in scrubs, holding a clipboard. Her name tag. "Read Samantha." Olivia nodded, taking a deep breath as she followed Samantha through the facility's halls. The smell of antiseptic and wet fur filled the air, punctuated by occasional barks and meows from the shelter portion of the building. "Dr. Patterson mentioned you were interested in our rehabilitation program for traumatized animals," Samantha said, glancing back at Olivia. "Any particular reason?" Olivia hesitated. Her therapist had suggested working with animals as a way to cope with her depression following the accident, but saying it out loud made her feel vulnerable. "I thought maybe we could help each other," she answered quietly. Samantha's expression softened. "Well, we have several animals that might be a good fit, but there's one in particular Dr. Patterson thought you might connect with." They turned down a hallway toward a quieter section of the facility. Through a glass window, Olivia could see a large, thin border collie with black and white fur lying in the corner of a spacious room, head resting on paws, eyes fixed on the wall. "This is Melody," Samantha explained. "She was rescued from a house fire about 6 months ago. She was a service dog for a musician, a violinist with an orchestra in New York. He didn't survive the fire, and Melody suffered some burns and smoke inhalation. She's physically healed now, but she's still broken inside," Olivia finished, her eyes fixed on the dog. "We've tried placing her with several families, but she becomes extremely anxious. She doesn't respond well to most people. The only thing that seems to calm her is music, but even then, she remains distant." Olivia felt a strange tug in her chest. A musician's dog, a service animal who had lost her purpose. The parallels weren't lost on her. "Can I go in?" she asked. Samantha hesitated. "She can be unpredictable with strangers. Maybe we should start with—" "Please," Olivia interrupted. "I'll be careful." After a moment's consideration, Samantha nodded and opened the door. "Move slowly, and don't try to touch her yet." Olivia stepped into the room, keeping her movements deliberate and calm. Melody lifted her head slightly, dark eyes assessing the newcomer with wary attention. Up close, Olivia could see the patches of fur that had grown back unevenly on the dog's left side, scars from the fire that had taken her owner. Slowly, Olivia sat on the floor about 10 feet away from Melody. The border collie's ears twitched, but she made no move to approach or retreat. "Hello, Melody," Olivia said softly. "My name is Olivia." The dog blinked, her gaze momentarily meeting Olivia's before shifting away again. From her pocket, Olivia pulled out her phone and scrolled through her music library. Finding what she was looking for, she pressed play, and the gentle notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune filled the room. Melody's ears perked up instantly, her head raised slightly, eyes suddenly more alert. Olivia noticed the change but kept her expression neutral, not wanting to disrupt whatever was happening. As the piano melody continued, the border collie's rigid posture seemed to soften just a fraction. "She likes classical music," Olivia said, not taking her eyes off the dog. "Her owner was a violinist, you said." Samantha, who had been watching from the doorway, nodded. "Yes, he played with the New York Philharmonic. Melody used to attend all his rehearsals and performances." When the piece ended, Melody's gaze shifted back to Olivia, studying her with what almost seemed like expectation. "I used to play," Olivia said quietly, more to the dog than to Samantha. She held up her right hand, showing the slight curl to her fingers that remained despite years of physical therapy. "Not anymore." Though, for the next 30 minutes, Olivia sat quietly with Melody, occasionally playing different classical pieces. From her phone, The dog never approached her, but Olivia noticed how her breathing seemed to sync with the rhythm of the music, how her eyes would close momentarily during particularly moving passages. As Olivia finally stood to leave, she made her decision. "I'd like to work with her," she told Samantha, "if you think it might help." Samantha looked surprised. "You understand this would be a long-term commitment? Melody needs extensive rehabilitation before she'd be ready for adoption, if ever." "I understand," Olivia replied, looking back at the border collie, who was watching her leave. "I have time." The drive home to her isolated farmhouse took almost 40 minutes, winding through country roads, flanked by autumn-touched trees. Olivia had purchased the property after the accident, needing to escape the sympathetic glances and whispered conversations that followed her in the city. The house came with 5 acres of land, a small pond, and a detached garage that she had converted into a music room, though it had remained largely unused. That night, Olivia found herself standing in that room for the first time in months. The baby grand piano sat in the center, covered with a sheet. With trembling hands, she pulled the fabric away, revealing the gleaming black surface beneath. Dust motes danced in the air around it. Tentatively, she sat on the bench and lifted the cover, revealing the keys that had once been as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. Her left hand moved automatically, playing a simple C major scale. Her right hand remained in her lap, the fingers curled slightly, a permanent reminder of what she had lost. The half scale hung in the air, incomplete and haunting. 3 days later, Olivia returned to the rehabilitation center for her first official session with Melody. Dr. Patterson, the center's director, met her in the lobby. "Samantha told me about your interest in Melody," he said, shaking her hand. "I should warn you that she's been through a lot of trauma. Progress might be very slow." "I understand," Olivia replied. "I brought something that might help." From her bag, she produced a small portable speaker and her tablet. Music seemed to reach her. "I thought we could try different compositions, see which one she responds to most." Dr. Patterson nodded approvingly. "That's a good approach. Familiarity can be a powerful tool in rehabilitation." This time, Melody was in a larger indoor exercise area. When Olivia entered, the border collie was lying under a bench, her eyes tracking the movements of a staff member who was cleaning the opposite side of the room. "Hi there, Melody," Olivia said softly, setting up her speaker at a comfortable distance. "I brought some music for us today." The dog's eyes shifted to her, showing recognition but no particular emotion. Olivia took that as a small victory. For the next hour, Olivia played various classical pieces, carefully observing Melody's reactions. The border collie seemed most responsive to violin concertos, particularly Vivaldi and Tchaikovsky. During one Bach piece, she actually lifted her head and maintained eye contact with Olivia for nearly a minute, the longest connection they'd established so far. "That was her owner's favorite composer," Dr. Patterson explained, having watched the interaction from nearby. "He used to practice Bach for hours." When it was time to leave, Olivia felt a strange reluctance. "Same time on Thursday?" she asked the doctor. "We'll be here," he assured her. And Olivia? It might not seem like much, but that was the most engaged I've seen Melody in months. On the drive home, Olivia found herself thinking about music in a way she hadn't allowed herself to since the accident. The way Melody responded to certain compositions, the subtle changes in her posture and attention, it awakened something in Olivia that had been dormant for too long. That evening, she returned to the music room and opened her old sheet music collection. With her left hand, she slowly played the melody line of Bach's Violin Sonata No. 1. It was fractured, incomplete, without the harmony that her right hand should have provided, but it was something. It was a beginning. Over the next few weeks, Olivia fell into a routine of visiting Melody 3 times a week. Each session followed a similar pattern. Olivia would play different pieces of music, and Melody would listen, sometimes moving a few inches closer, sometimes remaining at a distance, but watching Olivia with increasing interest. By the 3rd week, Olivia had gained permission to bring a keyboard to their sessions. The first time she set it up, Melody actually emerged from her usual spot under the bench, curiosity evident in her alert posture. "I'm not very good anymore," Olivia warned the dog with a sad smile. "But we'll manage together, okay?" She positioned her hands on the keyboard, left hand in playing position, right hand doing its best, despite the limitation. Then slowly, she began to play a simplified version of Debussy's Reverie. The melody was halting, imperfect, but recognizable. Melody took 3 steps forward and sat, her eyes fixed on Olivia's hands as they moved across the keys. When Olivia finished the piece, the border collie remained where she was, waiting. "Would you like another?" Olivia asked, surprised at the sudden emotion welling in her throat. She played again, this time attempting a portion of a Chopin nocturne. Her right hand struggled with the more complex fingerings, and she winced as several wrong notes interrupted the flow. But Melody didn't seem to mind the mistakes. She stayed, listening intently, her tail occasionally sweeping the floor in a gentle arc. When Dr. Patterson came to check on them, he found them like this: Olivia playing haltingly on the keyboard, Melody sitting just a few feet away, both of them completely absorbed in the music and each other. "Well," he said quietly to the staff member beside him, "I think we might be onto something here." As autumn deepened into winter, Olivia's visits to see Melody became the center of her week. She found herself practicing the piano at home again, working with her physical therapist on new exercises, specifically designed to improve her right hand's dexterity for playing. "I haven't seen you this motivated in years," her therapist commented during one particularly challenging session. Olivia flexed her fingers, pushing through the discomfort. "I have someone counting on me now." At the rehabilitation center, Melody's progress was subtle but significant. She had begun to greet Olivia at the door of her enclosure, no longer hiding when she arrived. During their 6th week together, while Olivia was playing a gentle Beethoven sonata, Melody approached and laid down beside the keyboard, close enough that Olivia could have reached out to touch her, though she knew better than to try just yet. "Dr. Patterson says you're making remarkable progress," Olivia told Melody one December afternoon as snow fell gently outside the center's windows. "He thinks you might be ready for a home environment soon." The border collie watched her with those intelligent dark eyes that seemed to understand far more than anyone might expect. Olivia took a deep breath. "I was wondering if you might consider coming to live with me. I have plenty of space and a pond you might like." And she hesitated, feeling strangely vulnerable. "I have a piano. A real one, not just this keyboard." Melody tilted her head slightly, her ears perked forward. "I'll talk to Dr. Patterson about it," Olivia promised. "No pressure. It's entirely up to you." That night, Olivia opened the windows of her music room, despite the cold, and played the piano for a full hour, the longest she had managed since the accident. Her right hand still struggled with complex passages, but she was adapting, finding new ways to approach familiar pieces. As she played, she imagined Melody lying beside the piano, listening. The process of adopting Melody involved several steps. First, Dr. Patterson and his team visited Olivia's property to ensure it was suitable. Then, they arranged a series of trial visits, first for a few hours, then for a full day, and finally an overnight stay. During the first home visit, Melody approached everything with caution. She inspected each room methodically, her nose working overtime to process all the new scents. When they reached the music room, however, her demeanor changed. She walked directly to the piano and sat beside it, looking up at Olivia expectantly. "You want me to play?" Olivia asked, smiling despite herself. She sat at the bench and began a piece she had been practicing specifically for this moment, Bach's Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, arranged for piano with a simplified right-hand part. As the familiar notes filled the room, Melody closed her eyes, her body relaxing visibly. The overnight visit came just before Christmas. Olivia had prepared a bed for Melody in the living room, but she also placed soft blankets in several other locations around the house, including the music room, giving the dog options for where she might feel most comfortable. That evening, as snow blanketed the countryside, Olivia sat at the piano playing Christmas carols while Melody lay on a blanket nearby. When she finished Silent Night, Olivia looked over to find the border collie watching her with an expression that seemed almost peaceful. "Merry Christmas, Melody," she said softly. That night, Olivia woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of whimpering. Following the noise, she found Melody in the music room, pacing anxiously in the moonlight that streamed through the windows. "Hey, it's okay," Olivia soothed, keeping her distance. "Bad dream." Melody stopped pacing but continued to tremble slightly. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia sat at the piano and began to play Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. Slowly, softly, her fingers creating a gentle lullaby in the darkness. Gradually, Melody's trembling subsided. She approached the piano and, for the first time, voluntarily, pressed against Olivia's leg as she played. The warm weight of the dog's body against her was unexpected, and Olivia had to blink back sudden tears. They stayed like that until dawn broke over the Virginia hills, the music washing away the shadows of the night. By early February, Melody had officially become a permanent resident of Olivia's farmhouse. The adoption papers sat in a folder on her desk, alongside a framed photograph Dr. Patterson had given her. An old picture of Melody with her previous owner, a smiling man with a violin tucked under his chin, and the border collie sitting attentively at his feet, both of them looking blissfully content. Life fell into a new rhythm. Mornings began with walks around the property, regardless of the weather. Afternoons often found them in the music room, Olivia practicing while Melody listened from her favorite spot beside the piano. Evenings were spent by the fireplace, Olivia reading while soft classical music played in the background. It wasn't always easy. Melody still had nightmares that would wake her whimpering and disoriented. Sometimes she would become anxious during thunderstorms, the booming sounds triggering memories of the fire. And Olivia still had days when the pain in her hand was too much, when the frustration of not being able to play as she once did overwhelmed her. But they learned to navigate these challenges together. When Melody became anxious, Olivia would play the piano, the familiar music creating a safe haven. And on Olivia's difficult days, Melody would stay close, her presence a silent comfort. One evening in late March, as the first signs of spring began to appear on the property, Olivia received a call from her former manager. "There's a small chamber music festival happening in Charlottesville this summer," he explained. "Nothing high pressure. They're looking for musicians to perform solo pieces, and I mentioned your name." Olivia's first instinct was to refuse. "David, you know I can't." "Before you say no," he interrupted, "just think about it. You've been practicing again, right? You told me so yourself. It wouldn't have to be anything complex. Just one piece, something you're comfortable with." After hanging up, Olivia sat at the piano, Melody at her feet. She placed her hands on the keys, feeling the familiar cool ivory beneath her fingertips. Her right hand would never have the same dexterity at once. That was a reality she had accepted. But over these months of playing for Melody, she had discovered new ways to approach the music, adaptations that worked around her limitations. "What do you think, girl?" she asked, looking down at the border collie. "Should we give it a try?" Melody lifted her head, dark eyes meeting Olivia's, with what seemed like encouragement. The next day, Olivia called David back and agreed to perform one piece at the festival, Beethoven's for Elise, which she had rearranged to accommodate her right hand's limitations. The weeks leading up to the festival were filled with practice. Olivia worked with her physical therapist on exercises specifically designed to prepare her hand for the performance. At home, she played the piece repeatedly, making adjustments where necessary, with Melody as her attentive audience. "You're my harshest critic, you know," Olivia told the dog one afternoon after a particularly frustrating practice session. "You learn from the best." As the festival approached, Olivia found herself growing increasingly anxious. It would be her first public performance since the accident. What if she couldn't go through with it? What if the pressure was too much? These thoughts kept her awake the night before they were set to leave for Charlottesville. Unable to sleep, she wandered downstairs and found Melody already awake, waiting for her in the music room. "You couldn't sleep either, huh?" Olivia said, sitting on the piano bench. Without turning on the lights, she began to play For Elise one final time before the performance. In the moonlight, with only Melody as her audience, the music flowed from her fingers more naturally than it had in years. It wasn't perfect. It would never be the same as before the accident, but it was authentic, filled with emotion that could only come from someone who had lost and found music again. When she finished, Melody approached and placed her head on Olivia's lap. For a long moment they sat, together in the quiet darkness. "Thank you," Olivia whispered, gently stroking the dog's head, "for helping me find my way back." The festival venue was a renovated church with excellent acoustics and large windows that let in the summer sunlight. Olivia arrived early, with Melody wearing her service dog vest Dr. Patterson had helped her register the border collie as an emotional support animal, allowing her to accompany Olivia during the performance. As they entered the building, Olivia felt a wave of anxiety wash over her. The familiar smell of the concert space, the sight of the grand piano on the stage, it brought back memories of the life she had left behind. Melody, sensing her tension, pressed closer to her side. Backstage, other musicians were warming up, the cacophony of different instruments creating a familiar pre-concert atmosphere. A young violinist approached, admiring Melody. "Beautiful dog," he said. "Border collies are so intelligent." "She's more than that," Olivia replied with a smile. "She's the reason I'm here today." When it was finally time for her performance, Olivia walked onto the stage with Melody at her side. The audience, expecting just another pianist, murmured with surprise at the sight of the dog. Olivia sat at the bench, and Melody settled beside the piano in almost the exact position she took at home during their practice sessions. Taking a deep breath, Olivia began to play. The familiar notes of For Elise filled the church, but this version was different from what most people were used to hearing. The left hand carried more of the melody than usual, while the right hand played a simplified but complementary part, an adaptation born of necessity but shaped by creativity. As she played, Olivia found herself not thinking about the audience or even the notes themselves. Instead, she remembered the night spent with Melody, both of them healing through music, both of them learning to trust again. The melody flowed from a place of genuine emotion, telling the story of their journey together. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of silence before the audience erupted in applause. Olivia stood, bowing slightly, and then gestured to Melody, who rose and came to stand beside her. Together, they took a bow, human and dog united by music and mutual healing. Backstage, David waited with tears in his eyes. "That was beautiful, Liv. Different from before, but maybe even more moving." Olivia knelt to embrace Melody, burying her face in the dog's soft fur. "We did it, girl," she whispered. "We really did it." The return to the farmhouse after the festival felt like coming home in a way Olivia hadn't experienced before. As she pulled into the driveway, the setting sun casting long shadows across the property, she felt a sense of contentment that had eluded her for years. That evening, they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies begin to emerge in the gathering dusk. Melody rested her head on Olivia's lap, completely at ease. "You know," Olivia said thoughtfully, running her fingers through Melody's fur, "when I first saw you at the center, I thought we might be able to help each other heal. But it's more than that, isn't it? We've helped each other find a new way forward." In the distance, a whippoorwill called, its melody carrying across the fields. Olivia began to hum along, spontaneous harmony to nature's composition. Melody's tail thumped gently against the porch boards, creating a rhythm of her own. Together, they had created something new, a duet of recovery, a melody of trust. Not a return to what was lost, but a discovery of something equally valuable, the courage to begin again, to adapt, to find joy. In the present moment, as darkness fell completely, Olivia led Melody inside to the music room. She sat at the piano and began to play a new piece she had been working on, her own composition, created specifically for the unique abilities of her hands as they were now. Melody settled into her usual spot, eyes half closed in contentment. The music filled the room, spilling out through the open windows into the Virginia night, not perfect, but authentic. Not what either of them had planned for their lives, but something beautiful nonetheless. And in that moment, both musician and dog were exactly where they needed to be. Story 2. The Whispers of Blackwood Trail. Agent Mia Donovan pushed through the dense crowd that had gathered along the tree line of Blackwood Park. The hot Oregon summer made the air heavy, almost suffocating, as the scent of fear spread through the onlookers. Yellow police tape fluttered in the breeze, marking off the area where 9-year-old Lucas Brennan had last been seen. "My boy! Where's my boy?" The desperate cries of Rebecca Brennan pierced the murmurs of the crowd as she collapsed against a female officer, her body racked with sobs. "He was just playing by the creek. I only looked away for a minute." Donovan's stomach tightened as she flashed her FBI credentials and ducked under the police tape. She'd been with the Bureau's Behavioral Analysis Unit for 12 years, and cases involving children were always the hardest. But this one carried another weight. It was happening again. 8 months ago, Victor Kane had been convicted for the abduction and torture of 8-year-old Zoe Phillips. The case had consumed the national news cycle for weeks, with every gruesome detail picked apart and analyzed. The evidence against Kane had been substantial. His fingerprints throughout the abandoned cabin where Zoe had been found, his DNA on the ropes used to bind her, and suspicious materials found in his garage. The public had demanded justice, and the courts had delivered. Kane was serving life without parole at Oregon State Penitentiary. So why was another child missing under nearly identical circumstances? And how could this happen if Kane was behind bars? Agent Donovan. Portland PD Detective Marcus Chin approached, his face grim. "You got here fast." "The director put me on the first flight when he heard about the similarities to the Phillips case," Donovan replied, scanning the park. "What do we know so far?" Chin flipped open his notebook. Lucas Brennan, age 9, disappeared around 2:30 p.m. Last seen near the creek. Mother looked away for approximately 3 minutes while helping his younger sister with a scraped knee. When she looked back, he was gone. Witnesses. Several people reported seeing a man in a baseball cap near the creek. No clear description. "Just like with Zoe," Donovan murmured. "Any security footage?" Park cameras were disabled an hour before the abduction. Maintenance claimed it was scheduled downtime, but we're checking into that. Donovan's phone buzzed. A message from her partner, Agent Theo Walker. K9 unit arrived. "Shadow is picking up something. Take me to the K9 unit," she said to Chun. As they approached the creek, Donovan spotted Walker with a sleek black Belgian Malinois. Shadow wasn't just any search dog. She was practically a legend in the FBI's K9 division. She had been the one to locate Zoe Phillips, tracking her scent through miles of dense forest to the cabin where she was being held. Since then, Shadow had become a symbol of hope, her image appearing on posters and news segments about the Bureau's work in child abduction cases. Shadow was currently circling an area near the water, her nose low to the ground, her movements precise and controlled. As Donovan approached, the dog's ears perked up, her dark amber eyes focusing intently on the agent. Walker nodded at Donovan. "She's got something." Shadow let out a low whine, pacing anxiously between a cluster of rocks and a narrow trail leading away from the creek. "She's agitated," Walker explained. "I've never seen her like this before." Donovan crouched beside the K9, carefully examining the area. Among the rocks, partially hidden beneath a fallen leaf, was a small blue bead, the same shade as the bracelet Lucas had been wearing in the photos his mother had provided. "We need to follow this trail," Donovan said, standing. "And I need everything we have on Victor Kane's case pulled up again." Back at the field office, Donovan spread the Kane case files across the conference table. Something had been nagging at her for months about the conviction, small inconsistencies that didn't quite fit the profile. "Theo, look at this," she called, pointing to a report. Kane's digital footprint was too clean. No search history, no communication with known predators, no psychological indicators. If he was sophisticated enough to plan these abductions, there would be signs. Walker leaned over the table. Maybe he was just careful. Too careful. And now we have a copycat. It doesn't add up. She pulled up financial records, another anomaly she'd noted during the original investigation. For 2 years before Zoe's abduction, Kane had received irregular deposits into his checking account from an offshore entity. The amounts varied from $2,000 to $8,000, not enough to trigger automatic banking alerts, but substantial for a man working as a night security guard at a local warehouse. "I always thought he might be taking payments for something," Donovan mused. But the prosecution built their case around him acting alone. Her computer pinged with an email alert. The forensics team had found something in the creek bed. Partial tire tracks from a heavy vehicle, possibly a van, on a service road that wasn't supposed to be accessible to the public. "Shadow kept trying to lead us to that road," Walker recalled. "But the local police said it was a dead end." Donovan's instincts flared. "Give me everything you can on that road, and find out who has access to it." The next morning, Donovan found herself parked outside an industrial storage facility on the outskirts of Portland. The facility manager, a nervous man named Powell, led her through rows of identical metal units. "This one here," he said, stopping at Unit 453, "was rented 3 years ago by a man named Vincent Torres. Paid cash, full year in advance, every January like clockwork." "And you've never met him?" Powell shook his head. "Just got the payments in an envelope, slipped under the office door. Not strictly by the book, but the boss didn't mind as long as the money kept coming." "When was the last payment?" "January. Due again in 3 months." Donovan nodded to the officers standing by. "Open it." The bolt cutters made quick work of the padlock. The door rolled up with a metallic groan, revealing a space that appeared empty at first glance. But as Donovan stepped inside, her flashlight beam caught something, a stack of plastic bins against the back wall. The first bin contained children's clothing, neatly folded. The second held various toys and small personal items. The third made Donovan's blood run cold. Dozens of photographs, surveillance shots of children in parks, schools, and playgrounds. Among them were pictures of Zoe Phillips before her abduction and recent photos of Lucas Brennan. "Theo," she called, her voice tight. "We need to get forensics in here now." The most disturbing discovery came in the fourth bin, a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten notes detailing surveillance schedules, security patterns at various locations, and chillingly specific information about children's routines. The last entry was dated 2 days before Lucas disappeared. But the handwriting wasn't Kane's. Donovan had studied his writing samples during the original investigation. This was completely different. As forensics processed the storage unit, Donovan's phone rang. "Agent Donovan. This is Warden Michaels at Oregon State Pen. You asked about Victor Kane's visitors." "Yes, thank you for getting back to me. He's had only one regular visitor, a man claiming to be his cousin, James Mercer. Comes once a month, like clockwork. Do you have security footage of these visits?" "Already sent it to your office." Back at the field office, Donovan and Walker reviewed the prison footage. The visitor, Mercer, kept his face angled away from the cameras, but one frame caught him in profile. "Run facial recognition," Donovan ordered. 20 minutes later, they had a match. James Mercer was an alias for Edward Graves, a former security consultant with multiple flags in the system for suspected ties to an organization called the Jackalls, a criminal network that had been on the FBI's radar for trafficking operations along the West Coast. The Jackalls were supposedly dismantled in a joint FBI-DA operation 5 years ago, Walker said, scanning the file. Most of the leadership was arrested or went underground. Apparently not all of them, Donovan replied. She pointed to a notation in Graves' file. Look at this, he has a distinctive tattoo on his right forearm. A jackal with the number 44. Rank identifier, Walker muttered. High up in the organization. Donovan's mind raced. What if Kane wasn't working alone? What if he was just taking orders, a fall guy, for a much larger operation? Before Walker could respond, Shadow, who had been resting in the corner of the office, suddenly stood. At attention, her ears forward. A low growl rumbled in her chest. What is it, girl? Walker asked, approaching his K9 partner. The dog moved to the door, her posture tense, alerting to something only she could sense. Donovan's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're looking in the wrong places, Agent. Donovan. A chill crawled up her spine. We're being watched. Walker immediately moved to the window, scanning the street below. I don't see anyone suspicious. Whoever it is, they know we're onto something. Donovan looked at the message again. And there, trying to lead us astray. She turned back to her computer, pulling up a map of Portland and the surrounding areas. The storage facility is here, she said, marking the location. The park where Lucas was taken is here, and the cabin, where Zoe was found, is all the way over here. Walker leaned in. That's a pretty wide radius. But look at this. Donovan traced a line between the locations. They all fall within 20 miles of this area here, mostly abandoned industrial properties along the old rail line. Shadow was still alert, pacing by the door. She knows something, Walker said. Just like with Zoe. She sensed her before any of us had a clue. Where to look? Donovan nodded. Let's take her out there. Tonight. The old industrial complex loomed against the twilight sky, its abandoned buildings casting long shadows across the overgrown lot. Donovan and Walker approached cautiously, with Shadow leading the way, her nose working the air currents. SWAT team is in position, Walker whispered, touching his earpiece. They'll move on our signal. Shadow suddenly froze, her body rigid. Then she took off toward a low concrete structure at the far end of the complex. That's the old security office, Donovan said, checking the site map on her phone as they followed the dog. It would have controlled access to the entire facility. They approached the building, weapons drawn. Shadow circled the entrance, her signaling behavior, indicating she had detected a human scent. Donovan tried the door, locked. She nodded to Walker, who moved into position. Then she kicked the door hard, once, twice. On the third kick, it gave way. Inside, the air was stale and thick with dust, but beneath it was something else, a faint chemical smell. The beam of Donovan's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing an office that appeared untouched. For years, except for one detail, fresh footprints in the dust, leading to a metal door at the back. Shadow darted ahead, scratching at the door, whining urgently. Lucas could be in there, Donovan said, moving forward. The door was secured with a new padlock, incongruous against the rusted metal. Stand back, Walker said, pulling out a small breaching tool. The lock gave way with a sharp crack. The room beyond was small, with concrete walls and no windows. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, illuminating a chair in the center of the room. It was empty, but the restraints attached to it told their own story. On the floor beside it was a child's shoe, blue with white laces, matching the description of what Lucas had been wearing. We just missed them, Donovan said, her voice tight with frustration. Shadow continued to circle the room, eventually stopping at what appeared to be a solid wall. She pawed at it insistently. Walker approached, running his hands along the surface until he felt a slight gap. There's something. Here, a hidden door maybe? Together, they pressed against different sections of the wall until they heard a click. A panel slid open, revealing a narrow passage. Get SWAT in here now, Donovan ordered into her radio as they entered the passage. It led to a larger room filled with electronic equipment, monitors showing security feeds from various locations, including Blackwood Park, the storage facility, and even the FBI field office parking lot. They've been watching us, Walker said grimly. On a desk in the corner was a laptop, still running. Donovan approached carefully, mindful of potential booby traps. The screen displayed a messaging program, with a conversation still visible. Package 2 secured. Moving to secondary location. Timeline: 24 hours max buyer ready. What about the FBI agent? Being handled. She'll be too late. Donovan's blood ran cold. They're trafficking these children. Walker was examining a map pinned to the wall. Look at this. There are markings all over the state with dates and initials. Previous victims, Donovan realized. This operation has been going on for years. Among the papers scattered on the desk was a shipping manifest for a freight company called Horizon Logistics, with a departure scheduled for 5 a.m. the next morning from Portland Harbor, just hours away. That's how they're moving the children, Donovan said, taking a photo of the document. We need to get to that harbor. As they turned to leave, Shadow suddenly growled, her attention fixed on the passage they had entered. Through. Footsteps echoed. Someone was coming. Walker motioned for Donovan to take position on one side of the doorway while he took the other. They waited, weapons ready. A figure appeared in the doorway, male, medium build, dressed in black tactical gear. Before either agent could react, Shadow launched herself at the intruder, knocking him to the ground. FBI, don't move. Donovan shouted, training her weapon on the man as Walker secured him. As Walker pulled off the man's mask, Donovan recognized him immediately from the prison visitation. Footage: Edward Graves. Graves smiled coldly. You're too late, Agent Donovan. The wheels are already in motion. Where's Lucas Brennan? Donovan demanded. You should be asking a different question. Graves replied. You should be asking who else is involved. Before Donovan could press further, the sound of SWAT officers entering the building echoed through the passage. Take him into custody, she ordered as the team arrived, and get forensics in here to process everything. As Graves was led away, he called over his shoulder. Ask the girl, Agent Donovan. Ask Zoe what she really saw. The interview room at Portland Children's Hospital was designed to be comforting. Soft colors, comfortable furniture, toys scattered about. But nothing could ease the tension as Donovan sat across from Zoe Phillips and her parents. I know this is difficult, Donovan said gently, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened when you were taken. Zoe, now 9, clutched a stuffed rabbit to her chest. She had spent months in therapy after her rescue, gradually recovering from the trauma. Her parents had been reluctant to allow this interview, but when they heard another child was missing, they had agreed. Zoe, Donovan continued, you told the police that Victor Kane was the man who took you. Is that right? The girl nodded slowly. Was there anyone else there? Anyone at all? Zoe's grip on the rabbit tightened. She looked down, then whispered, the Shadow Man. The Shadow Man? Donovan repeated. Can you tell me about him? He came at night, Zoe said, her voice small. He didn't talk to me. He talked to the first man. Did you see his face? Zoe shook her head. He wore a mask. But, she hesitated. But what, sweetheart? Donovan encouraged. He had a picture on his arm. Like a tattoo. A dog, but scary. And numbers. Donovan felt her pulse quicken. A jackal. Zoe nodded. And he was a doctor. He had those things doctors wear. A stethoscope. Another nod. And he gave me something that made me sleepy. A doctor. That was a new piece of information, one that hadn't been in any of the reports. Donovan made a mental note to cross-reference medical professionals with known or suspected jackal associates. As the interview concluded, Donovan received a call from Walker. Forensics found something on the laptop, he said without preamble. Emails referencing a Dr. Shepard, who provides medical oversight for their packages. Zoe just mentioned a doctor, Donovan replied. Check medical licensing boards for anyone named Shepard with connections to Graves or the Portland area. By midnight, they had a name, Dr. Alden Shepard, a former pediatrician who had lost his license 5 years earlier for prescription fraud. His last known address was a cabin near Mount Hood, less than an hour from Portland. The clock was ticking. According to the manifest they'd found, the shipment was scheduled to leave in just a few hours. The convoy of FBI vehicles approached the cabin with lights off, guided only by the pale glow of the moon through the trees. Shadow rode in the back of Donovan's SUV, her body tense with anticipation. The cabin appeared quiet, but a thin wisp of smoke rose from the chimney. Someone was home. Donovan gave the signal, and the tactical team moved into position, surrounding the property. Shadow stayed close to Walker, awaiting commands. FBI, we have a warrant, Donovan shouted as the team breached the door. Inside, they found Dr. Alden Shepard sitting calmly in an armchair, as if he had been expecting them. He was in his mid-50s, with silver hair and cold blue eyes. On his right forearm was the tattooed image of a jackal with the number 12. Agent Donovan, he said, his voice cultured and calm. I've been watching your career with interest. Where is Lucas Brennan? Donovan demanded, her weapon trained on him. Shepard smiled thinly. Not here, I'm afraid. You're looking in the wrong place again. Shadow suddenly barked, pulling away from Walker toward a closed door at the back of the cabin. Check it, Donovan ordered, keeping her eyes on Shepard. Walker moved to the door, Shadow at his heels. When he opened it, he found a small office with walls, covered in photographs and maps, a command center for the operation. But it was the computer on the desk that caught his attention. The screen displayed a GPS tracking program with a blinking dot moving along the Columbia River, heading toward the Pacific Ocean. Mia, Walker called urgently. They're moving him now by boat, not the harbor. Donovan's gaze locked with Shepard's. Call it off, she demanded. He shrugged. I don't have that authority. Then who does? Shepard's smile widened. You haven't figured it out yet? Who had access to all the case files? Who knew exactly what evidence to plant to frame Kane? Who could monitor the FBI's investigation from the inside? A chill spread through Donovan as the pieces fell into place. There was only one person who fit that description, Assistant Director Lawrence Carroll, our own supervisor, who had overseen both the Zoe Phillips case and the current investigation. Arrest him, she ordered the tactical team, indicating Shepard, and get me a direct line to the director. We have a mole in the bureau. As Shepard was led away, Donovan turned to Walker. That boat is heading out to sea. We need air support now. Within 20 minutes, Coast Guard helicopters were airborne, guided by the GPS coordinates from Shepard's computer. The target was a fishing vessel named the Siren, moving swiftly toward international waters. Donovan and Walker boarded a Coast Guard fast response cutter, with Shadow accompanying them. As they closed in on the fishing boat, Donovan could see figures moving on deck, armed men scrambling, as they realized they were being pursued. This is the FBI and U.S. Coast Guard, boomed a voice over the loudspeaker. Stop your vessel immediately. Instead of complying, someone on the fishing boat opened fire. Bullets pinged off the cutter's hull as the Coast Guard crew returned fire. In the chaos that followed, Donovan spotted a small figure being rushed below deck, a child. They're taking Lucas below, she shouted to Walker over the gunfire. The Coast Guard vessel pulled alongside the Siren, and the tactical team boarded, engaging in a firefight. With the crew, Donovan, Walker, and Shadow followed, making their way toward the hold. Shadow led them through the narrow passages of the boat, her nose locked on a scent only she could detect. They reached a locked door, which Walker quickly breached. Inside, they found Lucas Brennan, frightened but alive, along with 3 other children who had been reported missing from various states over the past year. It's okay, Donovan said, approaching slowly. We're FBI. You're safe now. As the children were being led to safety, Donovan's radio crackled. Agent Donovan, we've apprehended Assistant Director Carroll attempting to board a private jet at Portland International. Relief flooded through her. Good work. Make sure he's isolated. We don't know how many others might be involved. Later, as dawn broke over Portland, Donovan watched as Lucas Brennan was reunited with his mother. The boy ran into Rebecca's arms, both of them sobbing with relief. Walker joined her, Shadow at his side. The K-9 sat at attention, her mission completed, her dark eyes still vigilant. The Jackal's network goes deeper than we thought, Walker said quietly. Carol's cooperation is already exposing cells in Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Donovan nodded. And Kane? DNA tests confirm he wasn't at any of the crime scenes. He was framed perfectly, all the evidence planted by Carol and his team. The DA is already preparing to have his conviction overturned. Shadow leaned against Donovan's leg, and she reached down to stroke the dog's head. We couldn't have done it without you, she told the K-9 softly. As they watched the reunited family, Donovan's phone buzzed with a message from the director. The Jackal's investigation is now your top priority. Full resources at your disposal. The operation had been shut down, the children saved. But Donovan knew this was just the beginning. The Jackals had been operating in the shadows for years, with tentacles reaching into law enforcement, politics, and business. Dismantling them would be the fight of her career. She looked down at Shadow, who gazed back with unwavering loyalty. Together, they would follow the trail wherever it led, bringing light to the darkest of places and giving voice to those who couldn't speak for themselves. The whispers of Blackwood Trail had been heard, and now it was time to listen to the stories they told. Story 3. Until we meet again, a story of undying loyalty. The autumn rain fell in gentle sheets against the windows of St. Matthew's Chapel, creating a rhythmic backdrop to the muffled sobs and hushed voices inside. Marine Captain James Sullivan's funeral was supposed to begin in 15 minutes, but Maya couldn't bring herself to enter just yet. She stood under the protection of the chapel's stone archway, her black dress already dampened from the morning drizzle, watching as people filed in, faces she recognized from James's squadron, neighbors from their childhood in Michigan, distant relatives who had flown in overnight. But Maya's attention wasn't on any of them. Her gaze was fixed on the large Belgian Malinois, sitting rigidly beside her, its amber eyes scanning each person who passed, alert and vigilant. "It's okay, Echo," Maya whispered, resting her hand on the dog's head. "He's not coming." Echo had been James's military working dog for 4 deployments across 5 years. They had been inseparable since James had become Echo's handler in Afghanistan. The dog had saved James's life twice, once by detecting an IED buried beneath shallow dirt, and once by tackling an insurgent who had emerged from a doorway with a knife. James had saved Echo's life too, carrying the wounded dog 3 miles through hostile territory after an ambush left Echo with shrapnel in his hind leg. But James couldn't save himself from the drunk driver who ran a red light 2 weeks ago, just 3 months after James had returned home from his final tour. Echo hadn't eaten properly since the accident. He spent his days wandering from room to room in Maya's apartment where she'd taken him in, searching, sniffing, waiting by the door. Maya, James's younger sister and only living relative, had agreed to care for Echo, though she knew nothing about handling a highly trained military dog. All she knew was that Echo was the last connection she had to her brother. "Miss Sullivan," a voice broke through her thoughts. "We're ready whenever you are." Maya nodded at the funeral director, a thin man with kind eyes who had guided her through the arrangements with gentle efficiency. "Just give us 1 more minute, please." When the man retreated, Maya knelt before Echo, bringing her face level with his. The dog's eyes, usually alert and focused, seemed to look through her, past her, as if anticipating someone else's arrival. "Echo," she said firmly, the way she'd heard James speak to him countless times. "James isn't coming back, but we're going to say goodbye to him. Do you understand? We're saying goodbye." Echo's ears twitched at the sound of James's name, but otherwise, he showed no reaction. Maya sighed, stood, and straightened her black dress. She had pinned her auburn hair back tightly, but a few strands had already escaped, framing her tear-stained face. Clutching Echo's leash firmly in one hand, she took a deep breath and stepped into the chapel. The inside of the building was awash with the soft glow of candlelight, brightened occasionally by the gray daylight filtering through the stained glass windows. The scent of lilies hung heavy in the air, almost but not quite masking the mustiness of the old building. At the end of the aisle, positioned beneath the largest window depicting the resurrection, sat a gleaming mahogany casket. A meticulously folded American flag rested on top, stark in its crisp red, white, and blue against the dark wood. Maya felt her legs weaken at the sight. She had viewed James's body at the funeral home, had helped select the uniform he would wear, had chosen the casket, but somehow, seeing it here, in this solemn setting, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Echo, who had been walking calmly beside her, suddenly stiffened. His nose lifted, and he took several deep breaths, testing the air. Maya felt the leash go taut as Echo's posture changed from obedient companion to alert sentinel. "Echo," she warned softly, tightening her grip on the leash. "Heel." To her surprise, Echo obeyed, falling back and stepped beside her, though his body remained rigid with tension. They made their way down the aisle, Maya nodding at familiar faces as she passed. In the front pew sat 4 Marines in full dress uniform, back straight, faces composed. They had been James's closest friends, his brothers in arms. They stood as Maya approached, each offering a solemn nod that conveyed more than words ever could. "Ma'am," the tallest of them said, extending his hand. "Staff Sergeant Miller. I served with your brother in Kandahar." Maya took his hand, finding comfort in the strength of his grip. "He mentioned you often. All of you." The other 3, Rodriguez, Washington, and Chun, each offered their condolences. They had all contacted Maya after the accident, sharing stories about James that she had never heard before, filling in pieces of her brother's life that he had kept separate from his civilian existence. "Echo," Rodriguez said, kneeling to greet the dog. Echo's tail gave a single, half-hearted wag, the first sign of recognition he had shown to anyone since the accident. Rodriguez gently stroked Echo's head. "Hey, buddy, remember me? We patrolled together when your dad was laid up with that fever." Echo whined softly, pressing his nose against Rodriguez's palm. "He remembers," Washington said quietly. "These dogs, they don't forget." Maya felt tears threatening again and blinked rapidly to hold them back. She had promised herself she wouldn't break down. Not here. Not in front of these men who had faced death alongside her brother. She needed to be as strong as James had always believed she was. "Let's sit," she managed to say, her voice steadier than she felt. The Marines filed into the pew, with Maya taking the seat closest to the aisle. Echo settled on the floor at her feet, his body still tense, his gaze fixed on the casket, just a few feet away. The chapel continued to fill as more people arrived, distant cousins from Detroit, James's high school football coach, neighbors from the small town where they had grown up. Maya barely registered their presence. Her attention was divided between maintaining her composure and keeping a watchful eye on Echo, whose behavior was becoming increasingly concerning. The dog's breathing had quickened, his ears constantly moving, tracking sounds that Maya couldn't hear. Twice he had risen to his feet only to sink back down at Maya's quiet command. His focus never left the casket. "Is he okay?" Miller whispered, noticing Maya's worried glances at the dog. "I don't know," she admitted. "He hasn't been eating well since it happened, and he seems on edge today." "Military working dogs are smart," Miller said. "They understand more than we give them credit for." Before Maya could respond, the chapel doors closed, and the chaplain stepped forward. The funeral service was beginning. The chaplain's words washed over Maya in waves, sometimes clear and sharp, other times distant and muffled as her mind drifted to memories of James, her brother teaching her to ride a bike when she was 6 and he was 12. James at 18, standing tall in his newly issued Marine uniform while their mother cried and their father beamed with pride. The phone calls from overseas, his voice tired but determined. The way he had changed after each deployment, quieter, more watchful, until the only time he truly seemed like his old self was when he was working with Echo. The eulogies began. Miller spoke first, his deep voice steady as he recalled James's leadership, his courage under fire, his unwavering devotion to his men and his mission. Rodriguez followed, sharing a lighter story about James's terrible singing voice, and how he had nevertheless insisted on serenading them with country music ballads during long desert patrols. Captain Sullivan believed in duty, Washington said when it was his turn. But more than that, he believed in the bonds that form between those who serve together. He once told me that the greatest honor of his career wasn't the medals or the promotions. It was the trust his men and his K-9 partner placed in him every day. At the mention of this partnership, Echo's head lifted, ears fully alert. Maya placed a gentle hand on his back, feeling the rapid rise and fall of his breathing. "Easy," she whispered. Chun was the last to speak, his voice softer than the others, but carrying just as much weight. "James Sullivan saved my life in Helmand Province," he said simply. "He ran through open ground under heavy fire to drag me to safety after I was hit. When I asked him later why he had taken such a risk, he just shrugged and said, 'That's what we do.' That was James, straightforward, unassuming, and the bravest man I've ever known." Maya felt a surge of pride mingled with her grief. Her brother had never shared these stories with her. He had downplayed the dangers, minimized his own contributions, always insisting that he was just doing his job. Hearing these men speak about him now, she realized how much of James's life had been lived away from her, in a world of brotherhood and sacrifice that she could only glimpse from a distance. The chaplain returned to the podium, preparing to lead the congregation in prayer. The chapel fell silent, heads bowed, the only sound the gentle patter of rain against the windows. And then, into that silence, came a new sound, a low, keening whine that rose from Echo's throat. Maya's hand tightened on the leash as Echo suddenly stood, his body trembling with tension. "Echo," she whispered urgently. "Down." But for the first time since she had known him, Echo ignored a direct command. His whine grew louder, more insistent, drawing glances from around the chapel. Maya felt her face flush with embarrassment and concern. "Echo," she hissed, tugging gently on the leash. "Please." Echo took a step forward, and then another, pulling against Maya's restraint. His focus was entirely on the casket now, his nose working frantically to catch a scent. Maya had no choice but to stand and follow, aware of the eyes now watching them instead of the chaplain. "I'm sorry," she murmured to no one in particular. "He's upset. I should take him outside." But before she could turn toward the exit, Echo lunged forward with such sudden force that the leash slipped from Maya's grasp. The chapel collective gasp echoed off the stone walls as Echo bounded down the short aisle and leaped, landing directly on top of James's casket. "Echo!" Maya cried, rushing forward. Behind her, she heard the Marines moving too, but they were all too late. Echo stood on top of the casket, his paws planted firmly on the flag, his body rigid with what looked like anticipation. He sniffed urgently at the seam where the lid met the base, then threw back his head and let out a howl that chilled Maya to her bones, a sound of such raw anguish that it seemed to vibrate through the very air of the chapel. The chaplain had stopped speaking. The congregation sat frozen in shock. No one seemed to know what to do. Echo lowered his head again, pawing at the casket lid as if trying to open it. Then, to Maya's astonishment, he lay down, stretching his body across the length of the casket, his head resting on his paws, his eyes fixed on some middle distance as if waiting. "Echo," Maya said softly, approaching slowly. "Come here, boy." Echo didn't move. His breathing had slowed, but his eyes remained alert, watchful. When Maya reached out to touch him, he didn't resist, but neither did he acknowledge her presence. "He's looking for him," Miller said quietly, coming to stand beside Maya. "He doesn't understand." "I know," Maya whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I don't really understand either." The chaplain cleared his throat uncertainly. "Perhaps we should continue," he suggested. Maya looked at Echo, at the flag now wrinkled beneath his weight, at the solemn faces watching them. Part of her knew she should remove the dog, restore the dignity of the ceremony. But another part, the part that had seen the unwavering loyalty between her brother and this animal, couldn't bring herself to disturb Echo's vigil. "Let him stay," she said finally. "James would want him there." The chaplain nodded, and after a moment's hesitation, resumed the service. But the atmosphere in the chapel had changed. There was something raw and honest in Echo's grief that cut through the formality of the funeral. reminding everyone present of the real loss at the heart of the ceremony. As the service continued, Maya remained standing beside the casket, one hand resting on Echo's back. She felt the tension in his muscles gradually ease, his breathing slow and deepen. By the time the chaplain asked the congregation to rise for the final prayer, Echo had settled into a state of calm alertness, his eyes still fixed on something no one else could see. The service concluded, and the Marines who would serve as pallbearers stepped forward. Maya gently tugged at Echo's collar. "We need to move now, boy. They need to carry James." To her surprise, Echo stood immediately, jumping down from the casket with fluid grace. But instead of returning to Maya's side, he positioned himself at the head of the casket, sitting at attention, his posture perfect, as if prepared to lead a procession. Rodriguez exchanged glances with the other Marines, then smiled sadly. "He knows his job," he said to Maya. "He's escorting his handler one last time." Maya nodded, unable to speak around the lump in her throat. The pallbearers lifted the casket, and the funeral procession began its slow journey out of the chapel. Echo walked ahead, his steps measured and dignified, his head held high. Maya followed directly behind the casket, aware of the murmurs from the congregation, but beyond caring what anyone thought. This was James and Echo's final mission together, and she wouldn't interfere. Outside, the rain had stopped, though the sky remained heavy with clouds. A hearse waited to transport James to the National Cemetery, where he would be buried with full military honors. Echo paused at the chapel doors, watching intently as the pallbearers loaded the casket into the vehicle. When the doors of the hearse closed, Echo turned to Maya, meeting her eyes directly for the first time that day. In his gaze, she saw confusion, grief, and something that looked almost like a question. "It's okay," she told him, kneeling to wrap her arms around his strong neck. "You did good. You did so good." The drive to the cemetery passed in silence. Echo sat in the backseat of Maya's car, his posture unnaturally still, his gaze fixed on the hearse ahead of them. Maya kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, worried about what would happen at the graveside service. Would he try to jump into the grave? Would he howl again, disrupting the final military rituals? But her fears proved unfounded. When they arrived at the cemetery, Echo stayed close to her side, walking calmly as they followed the casket to the gravesite. The sky had cleared somewhat, allowing weak sunlight to filter through the clouds, casting dappled patterns across the green expanse of the military cemetery. The scene was achingly beautiful, row upon row of white headstones stretching into the distance, each representing a life given in service. The freshly dug grave waited, a stark reminder of the finality of death among symbols of eternal remembrance. The honor guard stood at attention as the casket was positioned above the grave. The chaplain spoke briefly, his words nearly lost in the gentle breeze that had begun to blow. Then came the rifle salute, 3 volleys of shots that made Maya flinch but left Echo unmoved. He sat beside her, watching the proceedings with the same intense focus he had shown in the chapel. A lone bugler stepped forward and began to play taps. The mournful notes hung in the air, each one striking Maya's heart like a physical blow. This was it, the final goodbye, the last honor her brother would receive. As the last note faded, 2 Marines stepped forward to fold the flag that had draped James's casket. Maya watched through tear-blurred eyes as they created precise triangular folds, transforming the flag into a compact blue triangle with white stars visible on the surface. Miller approached, holding the folded flag before him with reverent hands. He knelt in front of Maya, his expression solemn. "On behalf of the President of the United States Marine Corps, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service." Maya took the flag, clutching it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. As Miller stepped back, Maya became aware that Echo had moved. The dog had risen to his feet and was now standing at the edge of the grave, looking down into the darkness below. The Marines exchanged glances, but made no move to interfere. Echo stood perfectly still for a long moment, his ears forward, his body tense with attention. Then, with deliberate slowness, he raised his right paw and held it in a rigid salute, for several seconds before lowering it again. A murmur ran through the gathering. Even the chaplain looked startled. Maya felt fresh tears spill down her cheeks. "Did you teach him that?" Washington asked in a hushed voice. Maya shook her head. "Never. I've only had him for 2 weeks." "James must have," Rodriguez said, his own voice rough with emotion. As a final salute, military dogs don't naturally raise their paws like that. Echo remained at the edge of the grave until the casket was lowered. The mechanical whir of the lowering device seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet cemetery. When the casket came to rest at the bottom, Echo finally turned away, walking with measured steps back to Maya's side. He sat beside her as mourners came forward to offer final condolences, as people began to drift away toward their cars, as the cemetery workers waited discreetly in the distance for everyone to leave so they could complete their work. Through it all, Echo remained calm, watchful, present in a way he hadn't been since James's death. Eventually, only Maya, Echo, and the 4 Marines remained at the graveside. The sun had broken fully through the clouds now, casting long shadows across the grass. "We should go," Miller said gently. "They need to finish." Maya nodded, but found herself reluctant to leave, to walk away and leave James here in this beautiful but lonely place. Echo seemed to sense her hesitation. He pressed against her leg, offering silent support. "Can I have 1 more minute?" she asked. The Marines nodded and stepped back, giving her space for a private goodbye. Maya knelt beside the grave, still clutching the folded flag. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "How to say goodbye. How to live without you checking in on me, worrying about me, being my big brother." She swallowed hard. "But I promise I'll take care of Echo. I'll learn how to be what he needs. We'll figure it out together." As if understanding her words, Echo moved closer, resting his head on her shoulder. His warmth against her side was comforting, a tangible connection to James. "He'll be okay," a voice said from behind her. Maya turned to find Rodriguez standing nearby, his expression gentle. "And so will you." James made sure of it. "What do you mean?" Rodriguez gestured to Echo. "He didn't just train Echo to be a war dog. He trained him to come home someday, to be a companion." That salute, that was James's way of telling Echo his military service is over. He's released from duty. Maya looked at Echo, seeing him in a new light, not just as her brother's working dog, not just as a reminder of what she had lost, but as James's final gift to her, a guardian, a friend, someone who understood her grief, because he shared it. "Ready?" she asked Echo softly. Echo looked up at her, then cast one final glance at the grave. For a brief moment, his ears perked up. His tail gave a single wag, as if he had spotted someone familiar in the distance. Then he turned back to Maya, pressing against her leg in a gesture that felt like acceptance. Together, they walked away from the grave, through the rows of white headstones gleaming in the afternoon sun. The Marines fell into step behind them, a final honor guard for a fallen brother and his loyal companion. In the parking lot, they said their goodbyes, awkward handshakes and half-embraces laden with emotion too complex for words. Each man knelt to say farewell to Echo, receiving solemn acknowledgement from the dog, who had once been their comrade's other half. "He'll need a job," Miller told Maya as he prepared to leave. "These dogs, they're not just pets. They need purpose." "What kind of job?" Maya asked. Miller smiled. "He'd make a great therapy dog. With his training and temperament, he could help veterans dealing with PTSD. James would like that. Echo continuing to serve, just in a different way." Maya looked down at Echo, who was watching the Marines climb into their rental car. "What do you think, boy? Ready for a new mission?" Echo glanced up at her, and for the first time since James's death, his eyes seemed fully present, fully engaged with her. He leaned against her leg, not in neediness, but in partnership. As Maya drove home, the folded flag resting on the passenger seat beside her, Echo sat in the back seat, his posture more relaxed than it had been in weeks. The crushing weight of grief was still there. Maya knew it would be for a long time, but something had shifted, both for her and for Echo. They had said their goodbyes. They had honored James's memory. Now they needed to find a way forward, together. That night, After a quiet dinner where Echo actually ate his full portion for the first time since coming to live with her, Maya sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone. Echo lay beside her, his head resting on her lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. She found herself searching for information about therapy dog training, about programs that paired veterans with service animals, about the healing power of the human-animal bond. As she read, a plan began to form in her mind, not just for Echo's future, but for her own. "We're going to be okay," she told Echo, stroking his fur. James made sure of that. Echo lifted his head at the sound of his former handler's name, his ears perking up. For a moment, his gaze fixed on something across the room, something Maya couldn't see. His tail thumped once against the couch cushion, a gesture of recognition, of greeting. Maya followed his gaze, seeing nothing but the empty doorway. Yet somehow, the apartment didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility, of memory, of love that death couldn't diminish. Echo sighed deeply and rested his head back on Maya's lap, closing his eyes fully this time. As she watched him drift into peaceful sleep, Maya realized that James had given her exactly what she needed. Not just memories of a brother who had loved her, but a companion who understood loss, who had experienced it as deeply as she had. Together, they would find their way forward. Together, they would honor James not just by remembering him, but by living as fully and bravely as he had taught them to. Echo would never again bound across a battlefield with James at his side. Maya would never again pick up the phone to hear her brother's voice. But neither of them was alone in their grief. And perhaps, Maya thought as she leaned down to press a kiss to Echo's head, that was the greatest gift James could have left them, each other. Outside, stars appeared one by one in the deepening twilight. Inside, woman and dog sat together in companionable silence, mourning what they had lost but beginning slowly to discover what they had found, a new purpose, a new bond, a new way of carrying on the legacy of the man they had both loved. Not an ending, after all, but a beginning.